in the military, we were strongly discouraged, and if you put that in military terms, you understand what I mean by strongly discouraged, from doing our own tasking and doing our own work. If we weren't assigned a task, we were never supposed to remote view for ourselves or for personal reasons. And we would actually get some pretty raunchy treatment if we got caught doing that. And so even still today, I still have the habit of, if I'm not tasked with a session, then I generally don't do it.
Thank you. That was a great answer. That was very, very informative.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope it helps.
It did. Thank you.
But from what I find, if we're going to do something to save, our great way of life and to save the world and to save nature and all that, we better do it in a hurry, because we've got about a year before we're over the crest of the wave, and from that point on, we're just hanging on to the surfboard, trying to keep our heads above water.
That pretty much answers my question. Thank you. I think it's
okay.
to plane. I think we're going to plane now.
Yes, Lyn. Well, we're discussing the future here, but I guess the past is prologue, as they say. So I know you had an experience with 9/11. I mean, here we are on the anniversary of it.
Yeah, I was standing there looking up at the building, yeah.
Why don't you describe that a little bit, your experience?
I have actually come to terms with everything except one event that happened there, and I really can't talk about it. I really haven't come to terms with it yet. But I was there, and the restaurants had turned their TVs up and all that, and were getting the newscast and all as you went down the street. And much of the news was in error, not at all describing what was actually going on. It was a very traumatic experience for me and for everyone else. I had seen someone struggling to get out of the cloud of debris and all, and went to help, and this policeman stopped me and said, trained personnel only, and turned me away. And all I could do was just look back and see this guy fall. And it took me a year before I finally came to terms with that and had stopped destroying computers and stopped destroying my own life and everything else. I realized finally that I had survivor's guilt, and that if I had rushed in, I could have probably died too. I don't know if the guy died. I don't know what happened to him. I just knew that I had guilt because of it. I saw that, they say the people jumped. That's not what I saw. I saw people hanging on until basically their arms burned off and they fell. That has never been reported anywhere I know of, but the sight was much worse than I have ever seen reported anywhere. I saw the effect of the people on the street and the people who were struggling to get out of that area. And there's a lot of it that I can talk about now, but usually don't, because most people still don't want to know all the gory details. But anyway, it was a very bad time. It was a big mark on our history that I would imagine was, the equivalent of the attack on Pearl Harbor or whatever. It happens. History is that way, and I think it taught us that maybe we're not as safe and secure as we like to think we are. I don't know. That
now, there's another side of this, though, that you were unsure whether you even wanted to go to New York that day, right? You had all kinds of antsiness and so on. On the evening of the 9th, my wife and I were walking back and forth on the patio, and we were both
feeling it very strongly. Don't go to Manhattan tomorrow. Don't go. And, it's not like I listened to my local remote viewer or anything. And so the next morning, I drove to El Paso, got onto the plane to New York, and I was supposed to be there at 2 in the afternoon. Well, the plane taxied away from the terminal and broke down. We had to go back in the terminal and wait for another plane. They got us another plane. That plane taxied away from the terminal and broke down. So then they put us on another airlines. The other airline went to Atlanta. And so we got into Atlanta, and we had like a hour-long wait. Well, that plane had something wrong with it, and so then we had another hour wait, and that plane finally left, and we rode it into New York. Got into New York, and there had been a storm that day, and the storm, they told us, the storm had somehow turned around and come back. And so we circled New York City. It was nighttime already. We circled New York City for probably about 45 minutes to an hour. We finally landed, and I got to the hotel about 2 in the morning. So I was, 12 hours late. And all the way through it, my, that feeling, don't go to New York, was just growing and growing. Well, there was a pounding on the door the next morning and said, look out the window, and the first building had already been hit. And, and this was why. And, of course, like I say, the experience of it, I mean, the major part of it took me at least a year to get over. And I have this PK ability that I wish I didn't have, and I went through just totally demolished, burned out 12 computers over the next year's time, simply just the emotions, the guilt and everything else that I was riddled with for the solid year. But for me to say, oh, my mind broke the planes down and my mind put all these things up, I don't think I would say that. It's a strange coincidence, though, that everything just got in the way to keep me from going to New York that day.
Well, maybe it's the universe playing tricks or giving us messages or something.
Yeah, and it looks like like I say, I don't listen to my local controlled remote viewer very often. All I had to do on the 9th was go in and do a session and say, oh, why not go to New York? And, I would have probably stayed home. Just never occurred to me, simply because, like the last question, we were always sort of punished for developing our own targets and doing our own personal remote viewing work. And so it really never occurred to me to come inside, sit down and do a session and say, oh, why shouldn't I go to New York tomorrow? And so I didn't.
Wow. An interesting experience for sure, and a traumatic one, too.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to the real future now instead of the past. A couple more questions here. It's not exactly remote viewing related, but just generally speaking, the alternative speculative world is coming around to the view that there may be one or more breakaway civilizations. One would largely be based within the U.S. or NATO complex, and then there's a possibility that there's a residual German or continental European civilization that might have gotten its technology and money out after World War II. And can you comment?
Well, let me ask what you mean by breakaway civilization. I'm not sure what that term means.
Well, is there a possibility of a civilization that's not really under the control, as we would like to think it, of governmental structures? that essentially may view itself as being above that, and in addition, having the technology to basically be above that.
Oh,
so,
that's a different question. Yeah. Yeah,
well, I think
I sincerely hope that not all facets of our civilization are under the control of the government. That's, I'm a Texan. You just don't, we know what shotguns and front porches are for. So, I sincerely hope that. As to whether they have the technology to actually be outside the government, I really don't. That's a new consideration for me. I'm sorry, I interrupted your question. Go ahead.
Well, I guess the gist of it is if you could comment on this possibility that within, let's say, the NATO or U.S. Structure, there might be this kind of breakaway civilization, and what they might have achieved or be aiming to achieve, and then possibly if there's a German or continental European equivalent to that.
I think that now this is, like I say, not something that I've been tasked with, and so I wouldn't know the answer from remote viewing sessions. But just looking at the world today, I think that like Germany is struggling. I mean, the euro has just decimated their economy. Ireland, you go over to Ireland, and there are buildings that were being built, and now then they've taken thick saran wrap and just wrapped the building's first floor to keep people out of it. All construction is stopped, and there are half-constructed buildings all over Dublin. The economy, of Iceland was just decimated. And, I think everybody is back sort of to a point where they're saying, wait a minute, this whole global thing can be bad for us. And so I think they're going back to a more localized type of thinking, like Germany says, this European nation thing is a really good thing, but what about Germany? Iceland is definitely in that mindset. Hell with European politics. What's in it for us? And Ireland is getting that way very, very, very strongly as well. I think the U.S. is, tending toward that, but not as strongly as some of the European countries. And does each country have the technology to simply say, okay, there's your NATO, there's your European Union, there's, all of that. We secede from the Union. Yeah, absolutely. It's been in the news. Texas, there's talk in Texas about seceding from the Union. We're the only state that can actually do it. And the fact is that in Texas, we have every resource, both technological and natural, to be totally self-sufficient without the U.S. And there are a lot of people in Texas right now saying, hey, we need to secede from the Union. The economy of many of the small towns is such that the taxes they pay are 4 and 5 times the benefit they get back in from the government. And many of the small towns are saying, hey, we're tired of supporting bigger cities. And so, I think this mentality is there. The small towns, do they have the technology and all? No.